The sun was hot over the streets of Ouagadougou. Dust floated in the air as people moved around, selling fruits, fixing shoes, and carrying baskets on their heads. In the middle of all this, a tall man walked quietly through the crowd. He wore a simple military uniform. No shiny medals, no guards, no one calling him important. To most people, he looked like any other soldier. But this man was different. His name was Ibrahim Traore. What no one around him knew was that he had recently become the president of Burkina Faso. He didn't win an election. He led a military coup, removing the former leader. Many people had supported him, hoping for change. Yet today, he didn't want attention. He wanted to see the city, feel the streets, and understand the people without anyone changing their behavior just because he was there. He passed a woman selling roasted peanuts. She smiled and offered him a sample. He took one, nodded politely, and gave her a coin. She had no idea she had just served the president of the country. As he kept walking, children played soccer near a clothes shop. One kicked the ball too hard, and it rolled to his feet. He picked it up and kicked it back with a small smile. The children shouted, "Thanks, mister," and went back to their game, never guessing who he was. Ibrahim moved with purpose. He had a meeting later that morning at a government building. He could have arrived in a black car with sirens and security guards. Instead, he wanted to see how things really worked when no one was pretending. He wanted to know how people were treated, how security behaved, and whether things had changed since he took over. When he reached the gates of the building, he saw two guards standing tall. They looked serious and didn't smile. He walked up to them calmly. "I'm here for a meeting," he said. One of the guards looked him up and down. He saw no name tag, no ID badge, and no rank on display. "What meeting?" the guard asked, crossing his arms. "A private one," Ibrahim replied. The second guard raised an eyebrow. "You don't look like someone who has a meeting here. Do you even have clearance?" Ibrahim didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood still, watching them. The first guard smirked, clearly thinking this man was just another low-level soldier trying to sneak into an important place. "No badge, no entry," the guard said firmly. Ibrahim remained calm. He didn't raise his voice or get angry. He just looked at them and said, "You should check your radio." The guards exchanged glances, confused. They didn't know that the man in front of them was about to shake their world. The guards stood still, unsure of what to do next. Ibrahim's calmness made them feel uncomfortable, but they couldn't explain why. They had dealt with many soldiers and civilians, but something about this man was different. The younger guard, who had been the one to question him, shifted on his feet and glanced at his partner. "Check the radio," Ibrahim repeated, his voice steady. He didn't seem angry or upset, just patient, like he knew exactly what was about to happen. The second guard, still unsure, reached for the radio on his belt. He pressed the button and spoke into it, asking for confirmation. The air around them grew heavier with each second of silence that followed. The younger guard, looking more and more uncertain, kept his eyes on Ibrahim, who remained as still as a statue. A soft breeze blew, causing the flags above the gate to flutter slightly. After a moment that felt like an eternity, the radio crackled to life. The voice on the other end was sharp and professional, the kind of voice you'd expect from someone with real authority. "Let him through immediately," the voice commanded. "That's the head of state." The young guard's face turned pale. He froze, his fingers still gripping the radio. His partner's eyes widened in shock. They both turned to Ibrahim, who was still standing calmly, his hands at his sides. The young guard's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Sir," the second guard stammered, his voice shaking a little. I didn't know. We didn't." "It's fine," Ibrahim interrupted him. His voice was quiet but firm, and he gave the guard a small, reassuring nod. "Just don't make that mistake again." The younger guard nodded quickly, his face burning with embarrassment. He was still trying to process what had just happened. He had disrespected the president of the country, not knowing who he was. And now, all he could do was watch as Ibrahim stepped past him and toward the entrance. The gates creaked open, and the guards stepped aside. As Ibrahim walked through, he glanced briefly at the two men, but said nothing more. The only sound was the soft shuffle of his boots against the pavement, echoing in the stillness. His aide, who had been standing just behind him, followed closely, looking at the guards with a mixture of amusement and concern. As they entered the building, the guards stood frozen for a few more moments, unable to move. They were still trying to process the shock of what had just happened. The president had walked right past them, unnoticed, and they had almost stopped him at the gate. It was a moment they would never forget. The building behind the gates was quiet, but there was an air of importance inside. People were working, discussing plans, and making decisions that affected the country. But none of them knew what had just happened outside, how close they had come to a moment of great embarrassment. As Ibrahim and his aide walked deeper into the building, the events at the gate seemed like a distant memory. But for the guards, the weight of their mistake would stay with them for a long time. Inside the government building, the atmosphere was different from the quiet streets outside. The walls were lined with maps, reports, and official documents. The air felt thicker, full of important decisions and discussions. Ibrahim Traore walked calmly, but his mind was focused on what lay ahead. The meeting he had come to attend was crucial. It was a chance to make sure the country was on the right path, to ensure that the promises made during the coup were being kept. As he walked through the halls, he passed people who were busy with their own tasks. Some of them looked up, gave a brief nod, and then continued working. They didn't seem to recognize him right away, and that was just how he wanted it. He didn't need anyone to treat him like a president right now. He wanted to hear the truth about how the country was really being run, not what people thought he wanted to hear. But then, as he approached the door to the meeting room, something unexpected happened. The two guards who had let him in earlier were still standing by the entrance, talking to a group of other security personnel. They were whispering among themselves, and the younger guard kept glancing nervously toward Ibrahim. One of the security officers noticed Ibrahim and took a step forward. "Sir, we were not informed of any visitors today," the officer said, his voice sounding more cautious now. He looked around, clearly unsure about how to handle the situation. His eyes flicked from Ibrahim to the younger guard, who was shifting uncomfortably behind him. Ibrahim didn't respond right away. He could feel the tension building, and he knew this was the moment that would decide whether the guards would be more respectful or make another mistake. He could sense that they were starting to realize who he was, and it made the air feel even heavier. "You don't need to worry," Ibrahim said finally, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here for the meeting, and you'll know soon enough who I am. But for now, let's focus on the work." The officer blinked, clearly surprised by the response. He had expected the president to be angry or upset, but instead, Ibrahim remained composed. He stood tall and seemed completely unbothered by the tension growing around him. The younger guard looked at the other security officers, his face a mix of confusion and fear. The other officers began to realize that they might have made a mistake, and they were now waiting to see how the situation would unfold. Ibrahim, meanwhile, was not in the mood for any more confusion. He had come here for a reason, and he wasn't going to let a group of nervous officers stop him from doing what needed to be done. He stepped forward and pushed open the door to the meeting room. Inside, the people gathered around the large table looked up. Some of them seemed surprised to see him. Others looked uneasy, but none of them spoke. They all understood that the president had arrived, though they didn't know the full story of what had just happened outside. Ibrahim glanced around the room, noticing the uneasy glances from the others. He knew they would have questions, but he had more important things on his mind. The country needed real change, and this meeting was where it would begin. As Ibrahim Traore entered the meeting room, he could feel the eyes of the people in the room on him. There was an air of surprise, mixed with tension. The people sitting around the long table were key figures in the government, each with their own role in the country's future. But none of them seemed quite sure what to make of Ibrahim standing before them, especially after his unexpected entrance. Ibrahim took a moment to look at each of them. He could tell they were trying to figure out who this man was, standing confidently in the doorway. He didn't wear the usual formal attire of a president. His military uniform was simple, without the shiny buttons or gold trim that most people expected from someone in his position. But Ibrahim wasn't interested in appearances. He had something more important to say. "Everyone, please take your seats," Ibrahim said, his voice calm but firm. The room fell quiet as the people around the table slowly sat down. Some looked at each other nervously, unsure of how to react. One of the senior officials, a man with glasses and a serious expression, stood up first. "I don't believe we've met," he said, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Can you tell us who you are and what you're doing here?" Ibrahim didn't flinch. He had expected this. He knew that these people, most of them with years of political experience, would want to know exactly who he was, but he wasn't going to give them a simple answer. Instead, he took a few steps forward and looked the man directly in the eye. "I am the president of Burkina Faso," Ibrahim said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made everyone in the room pause. There was a long silence. The senior official's eyes widened, and for a moment, he didn't know how to respond. The other people at the table shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some of them looking around as if they were trying to figure out if this was some sort of joke. "The president?" the man stammered. "But how? Why didn't anyone tell us you were coming?" Ibrahim took a deep breath. "I didn't want to announce my arrival with fanfare. I wanted to see the country from the ground up, to understand the reality of the situation. No one here recognized me because I wanted it that way." The senior official still looked stunned. He glanced around the room, and the other people seemed to be coming to terms with the fact that the president was right in front of them. Their confusion turned into a mix of respect and nervousness. They had underestimated him, and now they realized how wrong they were. The tension in the room started to ease, but Ibrahim could see that the respect he had earned from the guards outside hadn't quite reached these officials. He didn't want their fear, he wanted their trust. He needed them to understand that the country's future depended on honest action, not politics. "I'm here to make sure this country moves forward, and that means you need to be honest with me, whether you like it or not. This meeting is not just about policies, it's about accountability." The officials exchanged uneasy glances. Ibrahim could see the wheels turning in their minds. They knew they had to be careful now. The president had shown them who he was, and they couldn't afford to take him lightly anymore. The room grew quiet as Ibrahim's words hung in the air. The senior official, who had stood up earlier, finally sat back down. Everyone in the room seemed to be thinking the same thing. They had underestimated him. And now, they were facing the president of Burkina Faso, not just the man in charge, but someone who had shown them how easy it was to make a mistake. For a few moments, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustle of papers. Ibrahim stood still, his eyes scanning the room, waiting for someone to respond. He knew they were all nervous, unsure of what to say after the shock of his entrance. But he wasn't going to let this awkward silence go on for long. He broke the stillness. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone," he said quietly, but with authority. "But I need to know the truth about how things are being run in this government. If we're going to move forward, we need to be honest with each other." Finally, one of the officials spoke up. It was a woman in her late 40s, with dark hair and sharp eyes. She had been quiet until now, but something about Ibrahim's words seemed to stir her. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "We can't keep pretending everything is fine. There are problems, serious problems, that need attention." Ibrahim nodded. He appreciated her honesty. "Good," he said. "We'll talk about those problems. But first, I want you to do something. Call the security team at the gates. Ask them to check their radio." The woman raised an eyebrow. "The radio? Why?" "Because there's something important you need to know," Ibrahim replied, his voice calm. "The guards at the gate made a mistake earlier today. They didn't recognize me." The woman seemed surprised, but didn't question him further. She turned to one of her colleagues, who quickly stood up and left the room. The rest of the officials exchanged uncertain glances, still processing the events that had unfolded. They knew Ibrahim was not a man to be ignored. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and the colleague returned, holding a small radio in his hand. "The security team was informed," he said, "and they were surprised. They said they didn't realize who you were, but they've since been updated." Ibrahim nodded. "Good. I want everyone to understand something. Respect is not a one-way street. It's earned, not demanded. The guards outside showed me respect when they realized who I was, but it's also important that everyone, no matter their position, understands that they must treat each other equally. The officials in the room listened carefully. They could see that Ibrahim wasn't just speaking about respect in the moment. He was setting a tone for how he wanted to lead. He wasn't interested in power for its own sake. He was interested in fairness, honesty, and accountability. This is just the beginning, Ibrahim continued. If we're going to fix this country, we need to start with the small things, like making sure everyone is treated with dignity, no matter who they are. The room was silent again, but this time it was a silence of agreement. They all knew that Ibrahim wasn't like the leaders they had seen before. He was different, and that was exactly what the country needed. The meeting ended shortly after Ibrahim's speech. The officials left the room, each of them looking deep in thought. They had come into the meeting expecting a normal discussion, but instead they had learned a valuable lesson about humility, respect, and leadership. Ibrahim's calm yet firm approach had shown them that he was not a leader to be taken lightly. As Ibrahim walked out of the room, his aide followed closely behind, noticing the change in the atmosphere. The building, which had felt stiff and formal before, now seemed lighter. The people inside were still processing everything, but it was clear that Ibrahim's presence had left a mark on them. They couldn't ignore him anymore, not just because of his position, but because of the respect he commanded with his actions. Outside, the two security guards from earlier were still standing by the gates. The younger one, the one who had been so quick to judge Ibrahim, looked nervous. He kept glancing toward the building, wondering if he would face consequences for his mistake. His partner, on the other hand, looked calm, though there was a hint of discomfort in his eyes. He knew something had changed, something they couldn't take back. As Ibrahim approached the gates again, the guards stood at attention. They had been waiting for this moment, but neither of them knew how it would unfold. Would the president be angry? Would he punish them for not recognizing him earlier? Ibrahim stopped in front of them, his gaze steady. For a brief moment, the younger guard couldn't meet his eyes, but Ibrahim didn't raise his voice or show any anger. Instead, he simply said, "You made a mistake, but everyone deserves a second chance." The younger guard looked up, surprised. "Sir, I didn't mean to." "I know," Ibrahim interrupted gently, "but remember this. Respect is something we earn through our actions, not our positions. Everyone, whether they are the president or a soldier, deserves that respect." The guard stood still, processing his words. The younger guard nodded, his face flushed with embarrassment, but also with a sense of relief. He had expected punishment, but instead, Ibrahim had shown him the importance of learning from mistakes, not hiding from them. "Thank you, sir," the younger guard said, his voice sincere. "It's all right," Ibrahim replied, giving him a nod. "Just remember that no one is above the responsibility to treat others well. That's how we move forward, together." With that, Ibrahim turned and walked away, his aide following closely behind. As they made their way to the car, Ibrahim felt a sense of calm. The city outside was still busy, still full of challenges, but he had made a small but important step forward. The people of Burkina Faso were beginning to see that change wasn't just about speeches or promises. It was about actions, big and small, that built trust and respect. The guards at the gate watched him leave, still in awe of how a simple moment had shifted everything. They would never forget the day they had disrespected Ibrahim Traore, not knowing he was the president, and more importantly, they would never forget the lesson he had taught them. The days after the meeting moved quickly. News of what had happened spread throughout the government building, and soon, the entire city. The guards who had once seen Ibrahim Traore as just another soldier now spoke of him with respect. The officials in the government, who had been unsure of him, began to adjust to his way of leadership. It wasn't just his position that made them rethink their approach. It was his actions. Outside the government, the story also spread, but in a different way. People in Ouagadougou and across the country began to talk. They heard about how the president had walked through the streets unnoticed, how he had shown kindness to the market vendors, and how he had calmly dealt with the security guards who didn't recognize him. To many, it was a sign that Ibrahim was different from other leaders. He wasn't distant or unreachable. He was someone who understood the challenges of everyday life. The people of Burkina Faso felt a spark of hope. They had been through so much in recent years: political unrest, insecurity, and uncertainty. They needed someone who was not just a figurehead, but a leader who understood the struggles of the common person. Ibrahim had already shown them that he was someone they could trust, someone who wouldn't hide behind walls or protect himself with security. He had shown them he was ready to face the challenges head-on. On the streets, people began to speak more openly about the president. In the markets, shopkeepers discussed his visit with pride, mentioning how he had treated them like equals. Children played in the streets, pretending to be soldiers like the ones they saw in the news. And at night, families gathered around radios to listen to the latest updates about the country, hoping for good news. Ibrahim's approach had started to shift the way people viewed power. For so long, leaders had been seen as distant, unreachable figures who made decisions from the comfort of their offices. But Ibrahim was different. He was out there, in the streets, among the people, understanding their needs. And that made all the difference. One evening, as Ibrahim walked through the city to meet with local leaders, a group of young men approached him. They had seen him before, but this time, they didn't just see a soldier. They saw the president. One of them, a teenager, stepped forward nervously. "Sir," he said, "we wanted to thank you for what you're doing, for showing us that things can change." Ibrahim smiled, nodding. Change doesn't happen by just talking about it. It happens when we all work together. The young men looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. They were used to hearing leaders make promises, but seeing Ibrahim in person, speaking to them like equals, made them feel like they were part of something bigger. They weren't just the next generation. They were part of the change that was coming. As Ibrahim continued his walk, he felt a growing sense of responsibility. The people were starting to believe in him, and he couldn't afford to let them down. The journey ahead would be difficult, but it was one he was ready for. The first steps had been taken, and now he had to keep moving forward. A few weeks passed since the day Ibrahim Traore had walked through the government building unnoticed, and the country seemed to be slowly changing. The people of Burkina Faso were beginning to see a leader they could trust, someone who wasn't just about promises, but about taking action. And while many had doubted him at first, they were starting to realize that Ibrahim wasn't the same as the leaders before him. He wasn't interested in power for himself. He wanted to rebuild the country. The challenges were still many. The country was facing political instability, economic struggles, and security issues. But Ibrahim wasn't backing down. He knew that change couldn't happen overnight. It required patience, hard work, and most importantly, unity. One day, Ibrahim gathered a group of local leaders, military officials, and community representatives for a large meeting. It was held in the heart of the capital, where everyone could see that change was happening. As he stood in front of the crowd, he could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt focused. He knew the country needed direction, and he was the one to provide it. "We all know the challenges we face," Ibrahim began, his voice strong and clear. "But I believe in the people of this country. Together, we can rebuild Burkina Faso. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but we will move forward, step by step." The crowd listened carefully, their faces serious but hopeful. Ibrahim continued, outlining his plan for tackling corruption, improving the economy, and ensuring security for all citizens. He talked about creating more jobs, building stronger institutions, and most importantly, making sure that everyone, from the poorest villager to the richest businessman, had an equal chance to succeed. As he spoke, Ibrahim noticed a shift in the room. The tension that had once been there was slowly melting away, replaced by a sense of unity and purpose. The people were beginning to believe in the future, in a future they could build together. After the meeting, Ibrahim walked through the streets of Ouagadougou, reflecting on the conversations he had just had. People stopped him along the way, thanking him for his leadership and for showing them that things could change. They weren't just words anymore. They could see it happening. Change was in the air. Ibrahim knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be setbacks, challenges, and difficult decisions. But he was ready for it. He had earned the trust of the people, and he wasn't going to let them down. He had shown them that respect, honesty, and action were the keys to true leadership. And now, with the support of the people, he was determined to make Burkina Faso a better place for everyone. The country was on the path to change, and Ibrahim Traore was leading them forward, one step at a time.